20 years ago, 4 women were found in a ditch behind a sketchy motel in Atlantic City, New Jersey. All were placed face down in the water from the neck up. All were clothed facing east in a deliberate staging, and all killed weeks apart. Who is the Eastbound Strangler, and what do 4 pairs of shoes have to do with one of New Jersey's most disturbing unsolved cases? I'm your host, Gabby D, and this is Beyond the Bonesaw. What do you guys think of when you hear Atlantic City, New Jersey? I think of the beach, casinos, a big party scene, and a lot of crime, sadly. Today we're actually going to go back to visit a small, sketchy motel in Egg Harbor Township, which is located in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Specifically, we're going to talk about this little motel that was called the Golden Key Motel, and in every way, shape, and form, this motel was sketchy as hell. The motel was known for their hourly rate, high volume of sex work, just people in and out constantly. The motel actually sat on Black Horse Pike, making it a very accessible location. And Black Horse Pike, for those that don't know, it's actually a historic highway in New Jersey. It's now known as a major artery connecting Atlantic City to Camden, New Jersey, Route 168, 42, and 322. Before that, it was a route for people on horseback. Now it's fall, November 20th, 2006, so almost 20 years ago, and 2 women were just taking a walk along the dirt trail behind the motel, enjoying the scenery. Around 3:08, they spotted something in the drainage ditch, and I don't know why, but that's so hard for drainage ditch. Say it 10 times fast. They found something in the ditch between the path they were walking and the back of the motel parking lot. And when they got closer, it turns out it was a deceased woman lying face down in a shallow, dirty ditch, and they called the police immediately. Now, it only took the police 12 minutes to arrive, and they confirmed a dead body within minutes. Upon their search, they stumbled across a second body around 3:53 p.m. Within 2 hours, 4 bodies in total were confirmed along this ditch. All 4 of them were laid out in a row along the water, roughly 60 feet apart. I see a lot of different lengths, anywhere from 40 to 80, but the most common one I see is 60 feet, so I'm going to go with 60. Now, these bodies, they weren't located in some messy, thrown-about dump site like they just ditched these bodies along the ditch. They were deliberately placed. They were all pretty much evenly spaced apart, and they were face down in the water, but their feet were all hanging out of the water. All 4 of them were also fully clothed, but barefoot. They had no shoes. One woman did have socks on, but the rest of them, nothing. And there was no shoes, no purses, no IDs, nothing to really determine who these ladies were. And I don't know about you guys, but I always assumed the name Eastbound Strangler was just because Jersey's on the East Coast and Atlantic City, it's right along the ocean, but it's actually the Eastbound Strangler because of the way he staged their bodies. They were all facing east, straight toward the Atlantic City skyline. The killer wanted them looking at the city for some undetermined reason. The weirdest part, they all weren't even killed at the same time. They had been there for nearly 6 weeks in total. The latest victim, which was the first woman found, she's actually only been there for 24 to 48 hours. So she was I don't want to say freshest kill, but it is what it is. She was sadly the latest victim. There we go. That's better. So the killer kept coming back to that same spot, right behind this busy motel, off of a busy road to drop another body, while the other bodies were already there. And then he did this 4 times in total. And the Golden Key wasn't the only seedy motel on Black Horse Pike. There were several lining the road, along with a few restaurants sprinkled in. Girls gotta eat, right? And by 8:25 p.m., the police were interviewing them all. Now, I did file some paperwork with a couple of the police departments in the area, just to try to get whatever I can, and it is unsolved, so I didn't really expect much, and allegedly, the Atlantic City Police Department are a little difficult to deal with in general, so I wasn't expecting anything from them. But I did get the activity detail report from the Egg Harbor Township Police. So all these times I'm listing are confirmed through their CAD system, which is basically an electronic system that's like one giant time log for 911 calls, their notes, when they interview suspects, when they look up license plate, and in all, they gave me about 25 pages with a range of months to go through, so It was pretty fun looking through it all and gave me a little bit more than what I was finding online. Now, this report does show that 15 motels were interviewed. I also found something I never heard broadcasted before. The day after, November 21st, at 7:22 a.m., a woman called in to request an officer to come speak to her immediately. Her name's redacted, but she said, and I quote, "The front of the restaurant is all glass, and myself and the cook may have seen something useful. Maybe this was never brought up because it was something useless, or it was never brought up because it's being held close for investigation reasons. Who knows? That's pretty much all I seen come out of it. Both her name and either the restaurant she works at, or I don't know if she works at a restaurant in a hotel, but all of it was redacted. Now, let's go back to the night the bodies were found. Officers did their job and forensics came in. By 9:25 a.m. the next day, New Jersey State Police were requested to help since they had access to the search dogs, and they brought in the cutest hounds. Eventually, the case would entirely be handed over to the state police just due to its severity. I mean, there's a serial killer on the loose. The search dog and the officer ended their search at 1:17 p.m., but nothing was reported that I could access. According to their report, there were also a few license plates that were ran, 5 of them to be exact, but nothing came from them. But let's go over our 4 victims of this story. And before we get into who these women are, I want to say something. Yes, they were sex workers. Yes, they struggled with addiction, but those are just facts of their lives. It's not the sum of their lives. These were mothers, sisters, friends. They were human beings whose lives were stolen from them. None of us have the right to judge, just like we certainly don't have the right to look away from this case because of that. So we're going to go over victim number 1, Kim Raffo. She was the first body found and the last one to be killed. Like I stated earlier, she was only dead for about 24 to 48 hours. Kim was born February 12th, 1971 in Brooklyn, New York. She was 35 years old when she was murdered. She was a wife, a sister, and a mother of 2. Both her parents struggled with substance abuse, but she still grew up to be this bubbly, loving woman with a huge future, according to her friends and family. And not to take away from who she was personally, but I just want to point out, this girl was drop-dead gorgeous. Stunning. I saw her pictures online, and she's just this blonde bombshell. Blonde hair, blue eyes, gorgeous woman. So Kim, in 1989, she married her husband Hugh, and they moved to Florida to be closer to Kim's mother and sister. Now Hugh, he worked construction, and eventually they did buy their first home, while Kim became the definition of a, and I quote, supermom. According to her sister and her friends, she wasn't just a mom, she was this PTA volunteer, a Girl Scout leader. Her neighbors called them the ideal family. But as we know, addiction isn't picky, and sadly in Florida, Kim would waver between her 2 lives. Her sister would later state, one day something just shifted in Kim. She didn't know if Kim just got fed up with being the superwoman of the family or the supermom, but she just changed one day. And it seemed to start in a cooking class that Kim actually took. She met a man named Kenny, and she began having an affair with him. Now, Kenny was a habitual drug user, and through him, Kim was introduced to cocaine. Her husband Hugh eventually found out, and he tried everything he could to get her away from Kenny, including attacking Kenny with a baseball bat. Now, Kim, she could not let go of this affair or her new cocaine habit, and it tore their family apart. There was no point in Hugh staying in Florida anymore when they separated, so he eventually sold the house and moved the kids to Ocean City, New Jersey. Now, Kim, being the loving mother she was, and her new boyfriend, now Kenny, followed them north to be closer to the children, but things only got worse from there. After yet another altercation between Hugh and Kenny, the kids were placed in foster care. I couldn't find the specific situation, like what happened between the 2 men. I just know there was always issues, they were always fighting, and something happened in this one where the kids were put in foster care, and this does happen a few times. So Kim and Kenny, they get jobs at the Taj Mahal Casino, but the city's drug scene swallowed them whole. And just a fun fact, the Taj Mahal Casino is actually, well, 1, I have a cousin named that, and 2, that's where I saw my first concert growing up. A shout out Mariah Carey, but I digress. So Kim, she moved from cocaine to crack pretty quickly. They both lost their jobs at the Taj Mahal. Kenny started shoplifting, and to support them, Kim started sex work on the Track, which is a strip for sex workers located on Pacific Avenue. And we'll refer to this a lot. Here's the part that really hurts, and honestly, it just breaks my heart because she was just so close to getting away. In September of 2006, weeks before her murder, and the discovery of her body, her estranged husband, Hugh, he was still working construction, and he had a job that landed him in Atlantic City, right nearby Kim, and he sought her out. And when he found her, he told her, "Look, Kim, I will help you if you want." At the time, her boyfriend, Kenny, he was in jail for shoplifting, so she took the chance, and Kim went with Hugh back to Long Island. He didn't ask her to be with him again. He just wanted the mother of his children to get clean, get healthy, and make better choices in life, which, good for you, Hugh. My heart really does ache for this man, especially with Kim being murdered weeks later. He just wanted better for her and to be more involved in her kid's life soberly. And that just truly says a lot about Hugh's character. He gave her a way out, and she was almost there, almost safe, but addiction is hardly ever that simple to get away from. And after 5 weeks, Kim told him she had unfinished business in Atlantic City that she needed to go back and take care of. She did promise she'd be back in a week, but she never showed. The last time Kim was seen alive was 2:30 a.m. on November 19th. She was at a restaurant called Papa Joe's, and the owner and Kim seemed super close. He said that she came in, she ordered her usual 2 fried eggs, American cheese and sausage on a Kaiser roll with a Mountain Dew soda. She ate, they chatted, she eventually left the restaurant, and he saw her getting into a black Nissan Altima with a client who we later found out was a doctor from North Jersey. The two actually went and stayed at a room in the Taj Mahal around 5 a.m., where he was paying her for some of her services. And when they were done canoodling, or whatever you want to call it, Kim actually said she was leaving the room, she was going to go buy some drugs and come right back, but she never returned. And the doctor, he called her several times, but she never answered. And that would actually be the last time he ever saw Kim. Now, just to state facts, the doctor, he was later cleared by CCTV as being at the hotel when Kim was gone. Now we're going to fast forward, they found the body, and we're going to go over what the ME, the medical examiner, was able to determine for her cause of death. Kim was the most recent victim, so the medical examiner was able to determine her cause of death, but due to the decomp in the other 3 victims, we aren't able to determine fully their cause of death. But we have an idea it's all around strangulation. They did say Kim, she did die by strangulation due to some sort of cord or rope around her neck. Her family would later take her ashes back to Florida and scatter them off the coast, back to where she was once the supermom. Our second victim is Tracy Ann Roberts, and this one hits a little close to home for me because Tracy was a Delaware girl. She was born on April 17th, 1983 in Wilmington, Delaware, and she was raised in Bear, Delaware. Tracy was only 23 years old when she was murdered. 23. Barely seen life, barely lived life. Growing up, she was active, social, very loved. At the young age of 14, she started experimenting with drugs, and by 16, she had dropped out of high school and began working where she met a guy who she eventually had a child with at 18. When her daughter was 5 months old, the father was awarded primary custody of her, and for a moment that loss became Tracy's motivation to do better. From all I see, he got primary custody because Tracy was an addict. And this was kind of the kick in the ass she needed to turn her life around. And honestly, unlike a lot of addicts, she was able to. She went to a trade school, she became a medical assistant, she landed a great job at a doctor's office, she even bought her first home. And things turned around for the better because with all these changes and her improving in life, her and the father of her child ended up getting back together and her daughter was back in her life. They all lived together. Everything seemed to be going great. Her mother, Joyce, would say this was the happiest Tracy had ever been and that she was finally getting her daughter back. But it all changed when her employer moved their practice and everything went downhill because it caused Tracy to lose her job. Without a paycheck, the mortgage payment stopped, the house went into foreclosure, and the relationship with her daughter's father ended again. And when you're already prone to addiction and your whole world is literally collapsing around you, it's a very dangerous recipe for relapsing. And Tracy sadly spiraled right back into cocaine. She did spend the next few years just drifting around between Delaware, Philly, and South Jersey. By August 2006, she ended up in Atlantic City to escape this abusive relationship she found herself in. I didn't find much about it, but just that this is the reason that she came back to Atlantic City, New Jersey. She worked for a bit as an exotic dancer, but her addiction took a toll on her body, and she just got way too thin, way too frail, and it was so noticeable that the clubs wouldn't hire her for work anymore. Desperate like many others, she turned to the track, like our first victim, Kim, for sex work. Now, the other women who also worked the track, they would say Tracy was very outgoing at first, bubbly, happy, kind of what we said about Tracy in her youth, but they watched as her light slowly dimmed over time. She went from this outgoing social butterfly to a quiet, reserved shell. And much like the first victim, Kim, right before Tracy was murdered, she almost made it out, but in an awful way. A man who was actually trying to be Tracy's pimp got pissed when she said, "No, I don't want a pimp." So pissed, he punched her in the throat, and he hit her so hard she started coughing up blood. She was obviously terrified and went to the hospital, where she eventually called her mother Joyce and told her mom, "Come get me, please. Take me home. Take me back to Delaware." And Joyce, like any other good mother, didn't hesitate. She got in the car and began that 76-mile, hour-and-a-half journey from Delaware to Atlantic City, determined to bring her baby home. But she got there 5 minutes too late. Tracy had already checked herself out of the hospital and walked out with 2 men right before her mother got there. When Tracy was found, she had been in that drainage, why is that so hard? Drainage. She had been in that ditch for weeks. Now, the medical examiner confirmed that she did die by asphyxiation. She was strangled, but you just couldn't tell with what or how due to the decomposition of her body. Tracy's body was eventually taken back to Wilmington, Delaware, back to the city where she was born, and would be put to rest far too early. Now, our next 2 victims were the first to be taken, and because of that, their files are the hardest to read. Their causes of death couldn't be identified due to the level of decomposition from being in the water so long. And we have to understand that drainage water, it isn't just plain water, which is bad for decomp anyway with your body. Drainage water is a perfect cocktail of moisture and microorganisms that speed up the clock when it comes to your body breaking down. And these 2 women had been in that ditch long before Kim or Tracy were ever brought there. In fact, the body of the second woman murdered was completely unrecognizable. Authorities had to release descriptions of her tattoos that were found on her body just to get a name. And thank God it did work. She actually had a tattoo of a bulldog, and that was the identifying marker for Molly Dilts. Molly Dilts was actually the youngest of the victims, being murdered at 20 years old. She was born in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. And fun fact about me, I feel like I've lived everywhere up and down the East Coast. I lived in Pennsylvania a long time before I came back here, and I wasn't too far from Latrobe. Now, Molly, she did grow up poor, but she was happy. She was a loving child, despite the upbringing. As a teenager, she was hit with back-to-back tragedies, though. The deaths of both her mother and her brother. And being a teenager, not knowing how to handle that, she turned to alcohol and drugs to numb her pain. She started having run-ins with the police, and she eventually dropped out of high school. Eventually, the courts get involved because, she's having run-ins with the laws, probably some truancy issues since she dropped out of school. And the courts decided to send her to rehab. But the grief Molly felt was just too heavy to stay sober. In 2005, she ended up giving birth to her son, but knowing she couldn't provide the life he deserved, she signed over custody to her father, which I'm sure was another challenge in itself. Now, for the next year, she bounced between Philly and Pennsylvania, just trying to find her footing. She arrived in Atlantic City in 2006, and her family saw a glimmer of hope when she visited in early October. The last time anyone would hear Molly would be on October 7th. She told them things were finally turning around. She said, "Hey, look, hit my mic. She said, "Hey, look, I'm still smoking weed, but I've put all the hard drugs behind me. I'm completely changing my life." And from all accounts, it really did seem like that. It seemed like Molly was really changing and growing, and she's 20, This is your 20s are when you're finding yourself and you're learning how to cope with things and you do better. And she, at 20 years old, that's pretty young to even be making that change. Now, the last time anyone would hear from Molly would be from a phone booth in Atlantic City on October 7th. After that, it was just silence until her body was found in that ditch. When she was found, her son was only 3 years old. He was being raised by his grandfather still, who says he's just grateful to have a piece of his daughter with him. And honestly, I couldn't find anything on her mother and brother and how they died, but I cannot imagine being that father. Could you imagine losing, if they were together still, they could have been separated or divorced, but let's hypothetically speaking, they're not. Imagine losing your wife, your son, and then your daughter is found murdered. I don't even know the man, I just want to give him a hug. Her uncle told CBS News she was a warm, loving kid. She had a lot of good to spread of the world, and it's just a shame she won't be able to ever do that. Molly was cremated, and her remains were sent home to the people who loved her. Now let's go over our last victim of the case, Barbara Bredor. And I did look up her last name. I saw 2 different pronunciations, but Brader were the 2, and Bredor seems like the most common one, so that's what we're going to go with. Now, Barbara's story is a stark reminder that addiction does not have a type. It doesn't care who you are, where you come from, it doesn't care what your skin color is, or how old you are. Addiction will swallow you whole, and that's what it did to all of our victims in this story. Now, Barbara, she was actually the first victim murdered and the last to be found. She was born in 1964 and raised by a prestigious, well-to-do family in Huntington Valley, Pennsylvania. She lived with her parents, 2 sisters, and a brother. Her family always said she was the smartest of the bunch. She went to Catholic school, then community college, and eventually Penn State. Her family actually used to beg her to go on Jeopardy because she'd sit there on the couch and, I feel like we all have that person that just shouts the answers before anyone else. They just know all these little trivial facts. And they said Barbara would shout out the answers before the contestants even had a chance to answer the questions. Her family also had a very strong foundation, but sadly it would crack when her father passed away and Barbara fell into this deep, dark depression. She dropped out of college, she moved to New Jersey for what she thought would be a fresh start in life, and for a while things were good. She would help her mother manage this boutique on the Atlantic City Boardwalk. It's a shop that sold Native American clothing, art, and jewelry. Her mom even had a few other locations. So, the company, she was doing well, especially if she's expanding. Eventually, in 1997, Barbara achieved her lifetime goal of becoming a mother. Her boyfriend Stanley ended up being prescribed pain medications for his back, and he became addicted. This is a very common occurrence leading to addiction that America still can't remedy. And one day, Barbara took one of those pills to help with her severe cramps she was having her period, and it was just downhill from there. Before we get back into the case, I want to take a moment to shout out the first ever sponsor of the show, Dubby. If you listen to us, you probably know most of my research happens late at night. We're talking deep dives at midnight, open tabs everywhere, timelines, court documents, police reports, the kind of rabbit hole where suddenly I blink and it's 3 a.m. That's where Dubby comes in. Their jitterless energy blends mean no crash, no shaky hands, and no foggy brain. Just clean focus that actually lasts. It helps me stay locked in while researching cases or recording long sessions without burning out halfway through. And honestly, I love that I don't feel gross afterwards. No guilt, no wired feeling, just steady energy when I need it most. If you want to support the show and stay sharp during your own late night deep dives, head over to dubby.gg. That's dubby.gg and use code BONESAW at checkout. That's BONESAW for 10% off your entire order. Huge thanks to Dubby for supporting the pod, and a huge thanks to you guys for listening. Now, let's get back to it. One pill turned into a full-blown addiction. And when the doctors stopped the prescription, the couple turned to heroin, as many people with addictions do. Usually people who start with pills fall down the chain to heroin, crack, meth. They're all cheaper alternatives and much easier to get than a prescribed pill. It's a cheaper alternative and it's easier to get your hands on. And for the next 8 years, heroin was in the driver's seat. By 2001, Barbara and Stanley had to make the most painful decision a parent can make, and they sent their daughter to Florida to be raised by Barbara's sister. And in my eyes, it's an honorable act, I'm sure a painful one. She loved her daughter enough to know she couldn't provide the life she deserved while in this grip of addiction. And we see it happen a lot. Too many parents are too selfish or blinded by drugs to do the right thing and let go. But in my opinion, Barbara made the right decision, and a very tough one at that. Of course, it's better if the addict can get clean and be involved in their child's life and grow, but that's not the story for a lot of addicts. So eventually, her sister in Florida was awarded sole custody of Barbara and Stanley's daughter. Now, Stanley eventually would go to prison, and Barbara's addiction shifted from heroin to crack. So, to survive, she, like the others, turned to the track for sex work. And I'm so sorry, the woman we just talked about before, Molly Diltz, the youngest one, the 20-year-old, it was noted that she worked as a sex worker as well, but it says it was in the past. I don't know if it's something she was doing again. I don't know if she was on the track. There really isn't much. It seems like Molly was really trying to do better, step away from sex work, step away from the drugs. I just wanted to throw that out there since I didn't specify earlier. Back to Barbara. So like the others, she turned to the track for sex work, and she was last seen October 17th, leaving a friend's house in New Jersey. Her sisters did try to file a missing persons report, but the state police allegedly gave them the runaround after finding out Barbara's past with sex work, which is something we see often in the world, sadly. Per usual, they didn't treat her disappearance with that urgency it deserved and clearly needed at the time. We find out later Barbara was likely the first one placed in that ditch. She was found the furthest away from the others, having been there the longest as well. Because this killer would literally drop a body and then come back a couple weeks later with another body. So he didn't just have these bodies lying around and left them there all at the same time. You know what I mean? He would go, drop one off, come back a few weeks later, drop another one off, and continue this 4 times. Now, Barbara's sister, Francine, she said it best. My sister didn't deserve to die the way she died. And then to be thrown like a piece of trash in a muddy ditch, I hope that SOB gets what they deserve. Barbara was eventually laid to rest in Winter Park, Florida, near the daughter she loved very, very much. Now, looking at these 4 lives side by side, a pattern starts to emerge, but for the Atlantic City police, that pattern was a riddle they just could not solve. Now that we've talked about who these women are and we get their backstory, let's talk about how they were found and dig a little deeper into that. Now, the police, they do believe all 4 women were killed somewhere else and then transported to the ditch. Then there's the drainage water, like we touched on earlier, which is just a forensic nightmare. Not only does it speed up decomp, like I stated, but it can wash away trace evidence, so they did not get any DNA, no skin cells, not even a piece of clothing, no evidence whatsoever, nothing. By the time the bodies were found, the crime scene had literally been washed away. We can tell the killer chose his victims carefully. These women all frequented the same motels, the same soup kitchens, and the same track for sex work. When they died, they all had substances in their system. Kim and Tracy had cocaine, Molly had a high level of alcohol, and Barbara had a lethal amount of heroin. Many investigators believe the killer didn't just find them high, but maybe he provided the substances and took advantage of them and their mental state. They think he used the drugs to sedate them, to lure them into a false sense of security before he moved in to kill them. Now, me personally, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about this idea because these women, they were addicts, and especially the fact it's Barbara, like she had heroin in her system. She was a heroin addict. I mean, she did crack as well, but we know she did heroin in the past. And then the ladies with cocaine, they were all known for being addicts who preferred cocaine. I just think they have a history with drug addiction, so just grain of salt there. I'm just calling it how I see it. This being said, he could have supplied them with what they preferred to incapacitate them. Sure. There was also no defensive DNA, no skin under the fingernails, no marks on their bodies, no cuts on bone, nothing. So this tells us the killer either overpowered them instantly or they were already unconscious from something else, like drugs, when he took advantage of them. Again, all 4 women were barefoot, but their feet were clean. And if they had walked through that brush and mud themselves, their feet would have been covered in dirt and mud, especially in that marshy area they're in. I'll be sure to post pictures, of course, on all the social medias so you guys can kind of check out the area. But if you were walking, you would have had something or cuts on your leg, like lacerations from like trash, rocks, the bushes, thorns, you know. Now, I do want to point out, it is a big thing. None of them had shoes. Most of them had socks, except Tracy, the girl from Delaware. She was the only one found wearing socks still, but that's it. And even her socks were clean. No thorns, no debris from the brush, no dirt, nothing. So that tells us someone carried them to this location. Another point is that they were all face down in the water, all pointing east toward the Atlantic City casinos. So whoever this was wasn't just dumping bodies to get rid of them. They literally arranged this scene. The killer laid them all intentionally a certain amount of feet apart, face down in this water, facing east. Now, with all the evidence just destroyed and washed downstream, you might be wondering, well, how do they know who's been there the longest? They also had a forensic botanist look at the algae growth on the woman's clothes, which is how we know that they were left there at different times as well. The water signature confirmed that this was a serial dumping ground over the course of weeks, but at no point did he leave a single piece of evidence. He came back 4 separate times and left nothing but the victims. No footprints were found, no clothing fibers, just nothing. It's honestly insane. And this happened in a ditch behind the motel, right? So the police, they obviously checked every name on that hotel log, every camera at the motel, because there was several running at the time, but they never found that smoking gun. There was no video of a body being carried in and out, no video of someone dragging these women. They never found a video of the woman at all. They aren't on any of the cameras or anything that looks suspicious. There was nothing. This suggests the killer knew exactly where the cameras weren't looking. He knew the layout of this motel. Now, I will add, I was going to go to the site to get a better view of the crime. However, it is all torn down now. The Golden Key and several motels on that strip were demolished about 10 years ago, so there's nothing to see. Nothing's even rebuilt there. It's just empty square parking lots surrounded by marsh and fields, really. Probably in some big attempt to clean up the city. Now, I did find aerial views just to give us like an idea of where the motel was, since there's just an empty slab of concrete there now, and you can see the marsh. I'll be sure to post it on socials as well. I'll also make sure that the photo has like markings where the bodies were spaced out, so you can see how it's very odd. It's definitely very staged. Now, let's move on to everybody's favorite part, the theories. And you guys, I posted about this on TikTok. This was going to be my first episode. You guys went ballistic. I think to this day, it's not like I've been up and running for fucking years, but it's been a few months. And to this day, the Atlantic City 4 posting I made, it was one of my first ones. You guys went crazy on it. There are so many theories, and I covered a few. I think I've got like the biggest ones, but I think everyone on there probably said something different. It's pretty crazy. You should go check it out. Now, the theories. To be clear, none of these have ever been proven. All of these are alleged theories. However, when a case goes this cold and almost 2 decades go by, theories will always grow in the absence of answers. And this case is still unsolved, so it's good to bring attention back to it as well as discuss it. Judging by the posting I put up and the others I saw, a lot of people thought and still do think the killer could allegedly be part of law enforcement with how clean this scene was. They could know the cameras in the area and move about with dead bodies in their vehicle very easily. They know how to leave no DNA and that the drainage system would destroy any of it if there was any. Plus the fact nothing ever came from it. No arrest was made, nothing, nada, to this day. And the police departments, they did get a lot of backlash for how this case was handled and how they did things. So I'm hoping deep down, they have something super close to the chest. Maybe they do have a little piece of DNA and it'll pop off in the codex system soon. Side note, did everyone see that last week another victim of Ted Bundy was confirmed through DNA? I just had to throw that in there. So, the positioning of the bodies, right? Why are they all facing east? Why are they barefoot? There's a theory that this was a ritual related to the Muslim community because Muslims pray towards the east, Mecca, and they do so barefoot. Now, this led police to a well-known local drug dealer who was actually a friend of Kim, the first woman we talked about, and the latest victim. He was taken into custody, but he was eventually cleared. While some may see a ritual, others see a red herring, or sadly just old-fashioned racist bias leading the investigation away from the real monster. The drug dealer was cleared and eventually released from custody. Now, we can't discuss this case without bringing up that motel repeatedly, the Golden Key, so let's dig into that theory a bit. Now, I'm going to try to explain the motel to you guys. Again, I'm going to put up so many pictures of everything, so find us on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, wherever. But I'll try to explain it the best I can. So the Golden Key Motel, it was a 2-story U-shaped building with the tips of the U facing the road. It was torn down in 2015, but in 2006, it was a hub for activity. Now, we mentioned nothing was seen on the cameras, but what I didn't mention is there was a very large blind spot that probably would have helped this investigation. The cameras were at the front desk, the second floor balcony looking down at the parking lot out front, and on the sides. But there was absolutely no cameras facing the rear of that building, where the bodies were staged. Again, it's torn down now, so I can't confirm or deny this, but I did see this in several articles about the cameras, and I did see photos of the cameras as well. So I'm pretty confident in this. Now, this did lead some to say whoever did this didn't just get lucky, they had to know exactly where those cameras were pointing. And this is why the main theory of this case is that the killer was either a guest or a worker at the Golden Key Motel. They could have dragged the bodies through the back door and straight into that ditch. Which, we're going to go off track here a little bit. Some people say that dragging them would explain why the shoes and socks came off their feet, right? Maybe they slipped off during a struggle, who knows? But remember what I said, their feet were absolutely clean. No mud, no scrapes, no debris. This theory led to a handyman who would later do jail time, but for another crime. So his girlfriend actually called in saying he's the killer. He had been a handyman at the hotel for about a month at this point. He worked there, and pretty much the work just covered his room. So he'd do odd jobs around the motel, fix some stuff up, and didn't have to worry about paying rent or anything. Now this, sadly, it just turned out it was a girlfriend, angry and scarred, who decided to call in and tell the police her boyfriend's a murderer, which is just disgusting, and I hate that shit. I hate when people do that. The police, they were looking for one thing, maybe a pile of shoes. Maybe this is the trophy the killer's taking, right? Or a killer with a shoe fetish, which is common. Or not shoe. Well, shoe maybe, or feet fetish, you know. They were digging around this worker's things before they knew it was the girlfriend who just was acting out and saying her boyfriend's a murderer. And they didn't find the shoes, but instead, they did find cameras rigged in his hotel room and some deeply disturbing images of a teenager for which he eventually served time in prison. They did not find anything linking him to the Atlantic City 4 case or anything tying him to the girls' murders. So his girlfriend, pretty shitty, you were trying to blame her boyfriend for murder, but also he's a fucking weirdo who was taking images of, I'm pretty sure it was her kid too, this teenage girl, and videotaping her in his hotel room. So like, fuck you. Go to jail for either one. I don't care. Stay there for the rest of your life. He might not be a murderer, but he's obviously a fucking pedophile who likes to assault young women. Another thing we need to address, and it's a bit of a dark one. So some investigators believe we aren't just looking for a killer, but we're looking for a collector. In many murder cases, hearing about foot fetishes, it's not uncommon. Just like hearing about it in sex work, it's probably more common than we know. Only God knows what those women deal with. But there is a line where admiration for shoes or feet turns into this dark obsession. Before we jump back into the action, I have to shout out the first ever sponsor of our show, Dubby. If you follow me on social media, you already know I'm usually deep grinding Apex or running missions in Warframe. And when you're locking in for hours, the last thing you want is that mid-game crash. That's why I've been loving Dubby. They're known for their jitterless energy blends, which means no crash, no weird shaky feeling, and no guilt. Just clean focus that helps you lock in and carry your squad for hours. And if you're an anime fan like me, you have to check out the Crunchyroll collab. The anime-themed shakers are insane. I've got the Chainsaw Man energy blend and the Free Run shaker on the way, and I cannot wait to show you guys. If you want to level up your setup and support the show at the same time, head to dubby.gg, that's dubby.gg, and use code BONESAW at checkout, BONESAW, for 10% off your entire order. All the info is in the show notes. Huge thanks to Dubby for believing in the pod, and a huge shout out to you guys for listening. Now, let's get back to it. And maybe that's the line the murderer crossed, right? We also have this story from a sex worker during that time in Atlantic City, and it sends shivers down my spine. She said she was in a motel room with a client, and he became very aggressive. He looked her dead in the eyes and said, "I'm the one who killed those girls in that ditch." And the most terrifying part, he wouldn't let her leave with her shoes. She ended up fleeing that room in absolute terror, running onto the pavement barefoot down the road. It wasn't until she saw the news later that all 4 victims were found without their shoes that she realized he wasn't making a sick joke. He was actually describing his kills. Also, imagine just running out of this motel room onto the cold pavement barefoot, fearing for your life, only to realize later that the shoes you left behind might be sitting next to the shoes of 4 women who never made it out of that hotel room. Not saying he's the guy, just like I said, all hypotheticals here, don't need to be sued. Now, this witness's story, along with a tip from a girlfriend during a domestic dispute, pointed police directly to a man named Terry Olson, that handyman who had been staying at the Golden Key Motel for free in exchange for repairs right around the time of the murders. Now, Terry, he always maintained his innocence regarding the murders. He even wore a t-shirt that said, "Off the hook," when he was released from prison on those unrelated charges of videotaping his girlfriend's daughter. Because there was no direct DNA match to the women in that ditch or any evidence in general, he was never charged with their deaths. And honestly, coming out of jail and wearing that shirt is very bad taste, Terry, but I digress. To this day, he remains one of the most debated suspects in this case, and probably the one I hear about the most. Now, another theory, and I understand. I see why so many people agree with this theory. I personally don't, but another theory is the Long Island serial killer, or the Gilgo Beach killings, as often referred to. They thought maybe he was the culprit. Now, when he was caught, this man, he was very open about his crimes. I feel like a lot of killers are. They either lie about it till the day that they're on death row and they take that secret to their grave, or a lot of them are open because they're like, well, fuck, either they don't care because they're just heartless psychopaths, or they're like, well, I'm already caught, so why not just tell you the gritty details, right? And some, they like to brag about it because they're just so sick. When the Long Island serial killer was caught, this man was very open about the crimes he committed. Again, he knew he was caught, he knew everything was laid out in front of him and what he was going to be in trouble for, so why not just open up fully? Why not just tell them everything? His killings also, the Long Island serial killer, I do plan to cover him, but I don't know enough about the case to fully speak on it, but I know like his MO was different. I know the investigators and criminal profiles, they ruled him out fully to this connection whatsoever. They said he has nothing to do with it. His MO was different. how he disposed of them. The very few things I do know is like his disposal method. He would hide his bodies. They were found wrapped in burlap sacks, camouflaged, and left in like heavy brushes to ensure they would not be found for a long, long time. But the Eastbound Strangler, the victims in Atlantic City, they were on display. They were placed in a row in a drainage ditch, face down, facing east. They were completely staged, and this suggests a killer who wants the bodies to be discovered and seen in a very specific way. Number 2 is the physical evidence in the clothing. The Long Island serial killer, we're just going to call him the Gilgo Beach killer. Well, they're both long, never mind. The Long Island serial killer, he generally left victims with little to no clothing or personal items at all that could lead to identification. The Eastbound Strangler, his victims were all found fully clothed except for their shoes and socks. This specific ritualistic removal of footwear is a signature not seen in the Long Island serial cases. Another's timeline and locations. The Long Island serial killer, his killings spanned over a decade, suggesting a much more patient, long-term cooling off period between crimes. Furthermore, while this Long Island serial killer had ties to many places, investigators found no evidence that put him in Atlantic City during that specific window in 2006. So they found nothing to place him in New Jersey at that time. Now, the Long Island serial killer, he actually just got caught in 2023. And like I said, the Suffolk County Police and the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office did review all the files for potential links between the two cases. And in July of 2023, the Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison explicitly stated, "We do not believe that the sex workers killed in Atlantic City are connected to Rex Heuermann," which is the Long Island serial killer's name. New Jersey authorities continue to believe the Eastbound Strangler was likely a local resident who was familiar with that drainage ditch behind the Golden Key Motel, or a transient that was just passing through. Now, our last theory, as I was preparing this case, I didn't just look at the old news reports. I reached out personally to the local police authorities in the area, and I know we touched on it in the beginning of the episode, but I want to really get into it. I put in all the official requests for files, catalogs, activity detail reports, autopsy reports, basically anything the state is willing to hand over, and the response wasn't as exciting as I'd hoped it'd be. Now, Egg Harbor Township in New Jersey, they did supply me with that catalog, but nothing too helpful, honestly. I mean, it gave me some better timestamps of when the bodies were found, the order, how they were found, so that's helpful. And I'm sure there's a lot cut out, and I understand because this is an unsolved case. But the Atlantic City County Police, which I was warned ahead of time that they were allegedly difficult to deal with and they give people a hard time. Doesn't matter if the case is solved or not. Apparently, allegedly, they are just a pain in the ass to deal with. So I didn't expect anything. I put in the request still, but again, I wasn't expecting much from anyone. Now, these reports, they're very specific on how you fill them out, right? So you give them the basics. You don't run your mouth. You don't just yada yada, jabber jaw. You know, you're like, here's the case number, here's the information I'm looking for, here's the files I want. So I sent in my report, and the first thing they said is they denied it because it was too vague. Vague? I was very specific on the things I put in there, but okay. So I asked what more they would need to know to make my request more accurate, right? And all they did was reply saying they legally don't have to answer that. So I in return did another request, and I dumbed it down even more. I made it as simple as I could. Case number, names of the women, the dates. I made it so specific and so blunt. They couldn't say it was too vague. I wasn't giving them the option. But again, I was denied, and they refused to state why. But whatever. And honestly, I wasn't going to share this with you guys, but this is another reason why citizens believe the murder was just a dirty cop. But to play devil's advocate, this is an ongoing unsolved case, which I've said a bajillion times, but that's a big reason law enforcement doesn't hand out this information, and I understand that. But the way they went about it, I was just like, okay. Maybe they're protecting the integrity of an active investigation, which I hope they are, and that's all I'm going to say about that. I wasn't going to share all this with you guys, but this actually is going to be what leads us to our last and final theory that I think is relevant to share, which is that for some reason, allegedly, the Atlantic City Police Department is covering this up. Now, Atlantic City, it is a tourist powerhouse, which brings in over $3 billion per year. And there are those who believe that admitting a serial killer is still running around wasn't a priority because it's bad for business, right? Or just the fact it was for sex workers, and we all know how that story can go with law enforcement, especially back in the early 2000s, when almost all law enforcement didn't see sex workers as equal. So to them, it was easier to try and shove the case down in the back of their minds and act like it just didn't happen, right? We've seen it many times over the years where sex workers are just swept under the rug like dirt. But either way, whether it's police negligence, a true lack of evidence, or a town protecting its bottom line, the result is the same. No answers, no justice. And I'm really curious to know what you guys think. If you have any other theories, I would love to hear them. If you heard anything else, I grew up in South Jersey. So when this happened, I was like 12 years old. I don't remember anything about it. My dad's side of the family is mainly in Jersey, and I asked them if they remembered hearing anything about it. My dad's a football coach, so he was obsessed with Madden. I don't know if he is anymore or plays all the time, but he used to play it all the time. And he said he played online with a guy who was actually brothers to one of our victims in this case. He doesn't remember him saying much, but he remembers it coming up and it just being a stain on Atlantic City. Now, my stepmom, she works in the hospital, and she said she remembers everyone just leaving that day to head to the crime scene, just to see if they could help. Definitely let me know what you guys think, or if there's anything else you've heard. You can let me know how you feel on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at BonesawPod. Find us on Facebook at Beyond the Bonesaw. You can even send us some case suggestions at beyondthebonesaw@gmail.com. If you've been enjoying the show and want more, you can find us on Patreon under the show's name. Over there, you'll get early access to episodes, ad-free listening, gory crime scene photos, and bonus episode every month that I don't post anywhere else. Last episode I didn't post because of the holiday, we took the week off, but Patreon still got an episode. And again, if I put it in Patreon, it will not be available anywhere else. So if you want to support the show and help me keep bringing you these stories, you can check us out on Patreon. The link will also be in the show notes and direct links on all social platforms. And if you haven't already, consider leaving us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. It really helps the show grow and reach more people. So leave us a review, subscribe, tell your friends. If you have any information on the murders of these 4 women or this case in general, please contact Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office at 609-909-7800. I'm Gabby D, and I'll see you guys next time, Beyond the Bonesaw.